Welcome to the Living in Alignment podcast. My name is Amy Landry. Through a collage of conversations, here we distill mindful living and timeless wisdom within a modern, everyday context. Thank you for being here.
Savira Gupta comes from a family of strong women rooted in the Arya Samaj Tradition, founded in April 1875 by Swami Dayanand Saraswati, who wanted to revive the Vedic way of life and the need to create a just society for all. She spent her childhood in Malaysia, formative years in India, teenage years in France, and adult years in the UK, Europe, and USA. And this has given Savira the foundation to relate to people from all walks of life and culture. With over 20 years of teaching experience, Savira approaches yoga with the lens of a sadhaka and seeker. Her approach to teaching invites exploration, understanding how yoga is a way of life, not just modern postures. Her holistic style of teaching encompasses the understanding of the physical, subtle, and causal body. Her classes are interactive and combine the key principles of the teachings with a dash of humour. Savira, welcome. It's such an honour and a delight to have you on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Amy, for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. And I would love to begin, as we always do with each guest, and that is, please tell us a bit about your story. So how, obviously it pertains to yoga, how the yoga practice came into your life in terms of perhaps the physical modalities and how you moved into that role as a yoga teacher as well.
So yoga, as I'm not talking about as in the asana form, was always part of my life in the sense of how I interact with people, listening to the Gita from my father, my mother, and watching them as my role models or my grandparents. I would say really it was my grandparents who started the process or bringing in the principles of yoga into our lives. And then, as I grew, that went out of the window, but it was on a very deep level, it still existed. The asana aspect came out when a friend of mine wanted to open up a yoga studio, and so she needed a guinea pig, and I was her guinea pig. So she practiced her teaching, and in those 3 weeks, I saw a change. First of all, my focus was just on the physical. I saw the change physically. And it was about 6 months later down the road that I started getting little bits of information from family, from friends, that something's different about you, something has changed, you seem a little calmer. And that's when I realized the impact of the asana. I didn't want to become a yoga teacher. So this friend of mine encouraged me to go and do a training. And I did my teacher training 200 hours in Santa Barbara with Ganga White and Tracy Ridge. And it was a purely physical-based training program. And I then had to do 20 hours in order to receive my certificate. So I started teaching privately, and just one thing led to the other, and friends started coming, I started teaching, and I focused mainly on private sessions and corporate sessions. And I came to, I would say, a block in my teaching where I had to understand a little more about the philosophy side of it. And that's when I went to India, and I took another teacher training which focused on the philosophy. That is when things started to change for me, and when I saw that the physical was not, it was there, but my main aim was to understand the philosophy of, who am I or what am I, or living in today's world, but with a little sense of stability, a sense of acceptance, and a sense of peace. And that's how my journey into yoga began. Mm-hmm. But I saw the results more or less when I went through several experiences with family members who were passing away, with my own divorce, and learning to adjust to a new life, how the teachings came into, that's when I put them into practice. And that's when it sort of came out, or sort of realized the depth of the teachings, and how yoga is more of a way of life than just a practice on the mat.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate your experience, just life experience in general, that you have lived in many different places and you've therefore had exposure to obviously a lot of different cultures, and therefore perceptions or ways that yoga is, let's say, performed or engaged with or embodied. And it's beautiful that in some sense you had that foundation first, the depth of yoga, that seed planted, and then later in life you found the more physical components. And obviously it tends to be the reverse for most of us around the world. So that is obviously such a gift. But obviously what you bring to the table here, let's say, is, yeah, a really well-rounded, excuse me, vision and capacity to support people in the community, having the background that you've got. And I love that. And in light of that, I would love for you to explain to us a little bit more about the Arya Samaj tradition. And I do hope
Yes.
I pronounce that correctly, especially
Yes.
as it pertains to your direct experience and your upbringing, your personal values, maybe even more specifically as, you know, your role as a woman in society, etc. I'm very curious to learn about this through your direct experience.
Right. So this started out in 1875, the Arya Samaj community, and was run by Swami Dayanand Saraswati. There were two main photographs in my grandparents' house. One was Yogi Paramhansa, and the other one was Dayanand Saraswati. So we never had any idols. Arya Samaj don't believe in idols. We don't believe in deity worship. We follow 10 principles. The idea of these 10 principles, they follow as: God is equal to knowledge. God is formless and eternal. Then we sort of focus on the Vedas. These were the teachings where we accept truth but renounce untruth, you would say. That whatever actions we do it for dharma and according to our own dharma. We promote community uplifting, physical and spiritual well-being, and we're always guided by justice and the truth lens. And of course, dispel avidya, more for vidya, so ignorance versus knowledge. And we follow the rules of society that brings uplifting in the right direction. Now, in the Arya Samaj, women were held in on a higher ladder. So my grandmother used to perform all the havans. She would recite the shlokas. Anyone having a baby, housewarming, any celebration, she would go and do this. She would perform these rituals. So education was key. And we believed that you were not born into a caste, that you were known by the career that you took. So it's we were more for, we were against the sati. That's the burning,
Immolation, yeah.
Yes. And then we also were for widows who could remarry. Because in some cultures, they don't accept that. So my grandmother was really part of this Arya Samaj, both my grandparents. And so this became the base of our upbringing. And there was no such thing in our vocabulary or in their vocabulary that you cannot do. If my uncle could do something, my mother could also do the same thing. So there was equality between brothers and sisters. And so I was brought up with that with these foundations. So for me, I've never seen, or I've never sort of created a difference between even my sons or between cousins, boy or girl. They were always equal. If one could do it, the other one could do it. Until today, I still feel I can go out and do certain things. And so our whole family was brought up on that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the core value of the Arya Samaj community.
So empowering.
It is.
Especially when you compare it to other customs that you see in India and traditions, particularly as it pertains to women in the household. Quite different. And really such a blessing. What a gift. And
It is.
in your awareness, like, is it still very commonplace, like in India generally,
Arya
the
Samaj,
big community?
yes. Yeah, it's a huge community. So my parents, both of them worked.
Yeah.
And I would always see them that before any major decisions would be taken, there was always both of them sitting and supporting one another. So I've grown up with that. And that is something that has been there. And then the Gita community, Bhagavad Gita, has always been also another foundation. So for me, was observing what my parents did on the outside, how they interacted, how they supported, how they helped. I saw their charity work. So these were things that we were brought up. Yes, I would say that, sometimes you can see it, but when you go into your own life and you have your own life, you get married, and they take a back seat because nothing major has happened in order to trigger those foundations to rise. And it always takes one incident or one experience, and then you realize, you know what, hold on. I have these tools in the back. It's time to dig them out and start using them. And so to me, these were important tools, and these are something that I teach my kids as well.
And so relevant
It
in
is.
today's world, especially for yoga practitioners around the world that feel a sense of curiosity and a desire to respect perhaps more of the Indian customs and culture that's very much associated with yoga. Everything you speak of seems very relevant and empowering to anyone, anywhere, which is incredible. So I'd love to pivot the conversation a little bit though now, because I'm really enriched by what you share on your Instagram. Your approach and your guidance always resonates with me, and I think, in my opinion, provides a really important perspective. So hence I'd love to chat with you about some themes that you've pointed out in a couple of let's say somewhat recent posts of yours. And this conversation will pertain more to yoga teaching, but for everyone listening in, even if you're a student or a practitioner, I think that there is so much relevance here to you also as a student and walking into a space with a teacher or engaging, looking for teachers, etc. So you've presented some ideas around Westernized, let's say, or Western yoga, lacking connection, perhaps being more, let's say, comparatively to the more traditional approaches in yoga. Perhaps more impersonal. I think you mentioned a bit more dry, lacking the humility. So, and you gave some really clear direction around this. You made some points. I think it was commercialization, cultural differences, time constraints, standardization, consistency, and external validation. So these are huge topics of conversation. So I'd love to know if you would like to expand on maybe one or two of these for the listeners and just bring us into your experience and understanding in this context.
So for me, you're taking the role as a teacher, whether it doesn't matter what your career or role is, because this can be used generalized. So for me, being the role of a yoga teacher, knowing what I am imparting and what its purpose is, I have to be careful again with the information that I give out when I'm teaching, the knowledge that I share. So for that to happen, I must have a grip and a solid base of understanding yoga, even if it's even if it's just asana, even if it's just pranayama. Understanding and establishing yourself in the basic foundation is important. And what I find with the teacher trainings that are happening is that we're just producing teachers without them having the understanding of the cultural background or the cultural meaning that certain practices are reverence. So, for example, when we sit in a class, we never show our feet to the teacher or to the deity. There's that. So I think what is missing in teacher trainings is understanding this. Why do we touch the book to our forehead if our feet have been on it? Because it's knowledge. So everything that we do has some kind of meaning and teaching behind it. And there's a certain amount of respect. Agreed, some of it may not make sense. But if you accept it for what it is and start to respect that, at some point in your teaching career, you will understand the meaning of that. And I think this is what's missing. We're teaching yoga, but we're teaching the asana, giving a little bit of the information about what yoga is, but we've completely disconnected with its cultural heritage, its cultural essence. And so it's like you're throwing me in with absolutely no tools. You're just giving me the tools to teach someone, take them from point A to point B, but there's no cultural significance. There's no essence behind it. So it becomes dry. That's one way of looking at it. And the other thing is everything is standardized because it's easier to reproduce if it's standardized. If it's individual, it's difficult to reproduce. And so when we standardize everything in a layman's term, you're automatically losing your individuality as a teacher, because now you've thrown them out into the world and you've told them, go teach. It's like taking a child and saying, now I'm going to throw you into the water, now swim. Mm-hmm. There's no background, there's no foundation, there's no understanding. The other thing I find is that many look at yoga teaching as a career that will bring that celebrity status. It's not the case. Maybe for some, if you're lucky, but for majority of us, it's not the case. It's hard work, right? So, and you have to put in a lot more than what sometimes is given, what you receive. So there's a certain amount of humility that's lost, because everybody and anybody now wants to become a yoga teacher, when I think that shouldn't be the case. Not everybody is suited in that role. And so you lose a lot of that connection when you are taking yoga as a career, because it's the in thing, or it's fashionable, or if it's your passion. Passion and swadharma are two different things. So I think on that basis, I find there's a certain amount of dryness in the teachings, in trainings. Yeah.
That makes so much sense. And it really ties back in even to the beginning of this conversation where you were sharing your story. And something that was going through my mind was that I really feel like the best yoga teachers are the ones that are not like really pursuing the teaching and or the job or the role as the teacher, but it just falls in front of them. The doors open. It's like they're thrust into that rather than craving or desiring or seeking the career or the profession or the status of a yoga teacher or professional. And I think, at the end of the day, when we, particularly in the online sphere, this celebrity status of yoga teachers is really just people who are asana instructors. That's all they are. It's a very simplified, diluted path and presentation of being a yoga teacher that kind of boosts the ego. And I don't mean that to be really negative or critical. I'm just trying to kind of be quite realistic in a sense that, we need the physical practice. We benefit. There's no reason to diminish the physical approach to yoga. It's incredibly beneficial, obviously, as you spoke to in your own personal story. But eventually, at some point, we have to mature and kind of go beyond that as practitioners and teachers. And I also feel, based on what you were sharing, is that a lot of people go into teaching first and foremost not having been immersed in the studentship and the practice for long enough. It's like a lot of people are diving in after, say, finding yoga 12 months ago or something like that, which I find quite concerning, to say the least. But yeah, there's also often a desire to escape a current reality, say a current job or profession, and thinking that teaching yoga is the solution because you love it so much and it's changed your life, for your mind, your body profoundly. But that is not necessarily the call to then take on that role. I don't know if that resonates for you.
No, it makes sense because you see, you as a student, the effect of yoga is different, but when you're actually teaching it, it is totally different. The one thing I've noticed is that yes, numbers matter, how many people come into your studios. That's the thing. We're catering to the desires of our students. Now, I don't know if the desire is being fueled by the students or it is being fueled by studios and teachers. We cannot accept, or we find that if we are boring, we won't get numbers in, right? And practice of yoga is steady. You may do the same asana every day. You learn through them, subtleties you'll get out of them. So I've noticed where somebody will become this huge celebrity, will have gained followers. All of a sudden, a book will come out, a huge website will come out, or an app will come out, or a podcast will come out. Things like that build and build and build and build. So on one hand, you're saying it shouldn't be capitalized, but on the other hand, it is being capitalized. So this is where I feel that teachers really need to rein it in, because there's enough for everybody. But if your aim is to be there, then you're going to lose certain things about the teachings, about yourself, who you are as a teacher as well, in the process of building that, whatever that is. So for me, it is, I have enough. I don't need to go out and get more. I teach my classes and then that's it. I don't feel the need to, I don't know, to build an empire. It's just, it takes up too much of my time, and I will lose myself and my sense of who I am as a teacher in that process.
Yeah, that deeply resonates. And it is a really interesting time that we're in at the moment, because we've never had so much social media, so much online, especially post-COVID. The yoga landscape, let's say, is really shifting and evolving. And we've lost the duration of classes has shrunk. Everything's faster, everything's quicker, everything's more stimulating. And I think that we're actually moving further and further and further away. And, at the end of the day, instead of trying to be popular or do what you think your students want, there's one thing I've at least experienced, is that you will always find your people. The people, if you care deeply about integrity and representing yoga in a more wholesome sense, you're going to find your people, because there are so many students that are actually seeking that. They're seeking more
Yes.
knowledge and more depth, and they don't know who to turn to. They don't know who to go to. And quite often, as you touched on, studio owners, managers, and a lot of teachers also don't know either. Like, everybody's quite misguided. And unfortunately, the real masterful teachers are sort of, as you pointed to, just content, happy, doing their thing, serving their community, not in the limelight. And it's a very different time, especially with the continued generations of yoga teaching coming through. And also, I really, going back to your mention about books, and that's something, and I should say, not touching books with the feet. This is something that I picked up when studying in India, probably about 12 years ago now, and have totally passed that on to our children as well. I think that is such a perspective or an approach, a reverence that can be relevant to all. It's not just a yoga thing or an Indian thing. It's like, wow, it's something that is universal in nature, teaching us you don't put your feet on books. And I've noticed that even at teacher trainings, I would go and do a course or a training or something, and there is no awareness whatsoever. You're studying on the floor, notebooks on the floor, someone will accidentally kick something or step on something, and it's just like, oops, and for me, having spent that time in India, you're like, oh my goodness, and I think my point here is that really spending some time in India is so important. And we don't need to necessarily go to India to do a formalized training as such, but to be there and to have that cultural experience, I think, is really important. And people that come from that cultural heritage, listening to their experience and their opinion and their guidance is really important. Not to say it's all consistent, because obviously people from the Indian heritage, there's a lot of differences of opinion in terms of yoga and whatnot, which I think that you speak really beautifully to as well online. But yes, I think that cultural understanding is really important when we sort of tie it back into, I guess, the point of this, and that is this really making sure that there's, I would say in a simplistic sense, that deeper connection in the yoga practice for students, whether it's in the classroom or at home in personal sadhana, etc. So is there anything else you would like to add to that before we move on?
Yes, one thing I wanted to add was never underestimate your students who come into your class. Because I sometimes find the students are more aware of things, information, than yoga teachers are. And I find students, they know what they want. They really do, but we have to listen to it. And you'll be surprised, just from my experience, most of them are not interested in gimmicky, fast-paced. They really want to focus on sadhana. And so I always believe that my students, when they come in, I never underestimate them. I think sometimes they know even more than I do. And I really respect that in my students. And that's something I strongly believe in, is that we as teachers need to respect our students, because they come to our class for a certain reason. And that trust that they bond, that they have with you as a teacher, is sacred.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Even that can be reflected in a very simplistic sense. Let's say you have so many yoga teachers out there running events, workshops, and retreats. And I think I've noticed this in mentoring yoga teachers, is that often they'll think, well, who's going to come to my retreat or my workshop? And I think your students will, because a million people could go on a retreat to India or to Bali or to wherever. There's so many things happening all the time, but your students want to be with you, and the cultivation of that relationship is really, really sacred and important.
And don't worry about the numbers. It's part of life, up and down. You don't know. So yes, I agree. If you teach a class, you have 20 people, and all of a sudden one day you have 5. Don't be disappointed by the 15 who are not there. you have 5 who are there. So teach to them like you were teaching to a full class. They should not be, you should not take away from them. So all the more reason you have a lot more to give because there's a few there. So for me, teaching is whether I at times will have 3 people in a class and I'm happy. I always say I love a small class because there's so much more you can do and give while you're in that class.
It's definitely a different dynamic and far more intimate as well. And I think if you've got less people, all the more reason to serve them greatly because they are the ones that have continued to show up, which is incredible. So I think this really ties in with what you've been speaking to, but I'd love to also highlight in another Instagram post. And you eloquently stated that in this consumerist yoga land, the pursuit of becoming a teacher is often entangled with capitalism, fame, and the allure of a popular lifestyle, and the quest for recognition can overshadow the essential questions that should precede such a journey. And then you go on to ask us an essential question, and that is, what is the driving force behind the aspiration to teach yoga? So please again share with us a little bit more around this and what you're witnessing in the overwhelming number of practitioners becoming teachers. I also think perhaps we could say instructors might be a more fitting word. I think these two are two differing qualities in how yoga is shared and presented. And also there's some complexity here, I think, as well, in the desire and the mission to really uplift voices of teachers who are from the Indian subcontinent, let's say, in the community, in the Indian diaspora, etc. So I'd love to know your perspective on all of that.
Okay.
It's a big topic, I know.
It's a big topic. So whenever I've been asked, I want to take a yoga training to become a yoga teacher, my first question to them is, why a yoga teacher? So go back and think about it. And if you notice they say, oh, because it's changed my life and I want to change others, to me, that's not a good enough answer. I cannot change your life. I can only give you or offer you the tools. It's up to you to do the work. So I cannot change your life. So if you think that by becoming a yoga teacher, you're going to change my life as a student, to me, it's a red flag. Also, why this change from whatever current job you're taking? Why yoga teacher? Why not pursue something else that's in line? So these are the questions I tend to ask my students. And then what is it about yoga that you want to teach? What aspect of yoga? What element of yoga do you want to teach? Because it's vast. You can be asana, pranayama, you can be meditative, you can be philosophy. What aspect? But does it align with your truth or with your principles? If it doesn't, then why do you want to teach yoga? Right? And then how much time will you invest into your own self and practice in order for you to become a yoga teacher? Because if you're just going to teach and you're not going to do the work, then to me that doesn't make sense. It just doesn't go. The other thing is, I heard Swami Sarvapriyananda, he said it very nicely. He says, everybody should be spiritual. Everybody should make the effort, but not everybody can achieve that. So it's great that everybody wants to become a yoga teacher and share the teachings, but not everybody has the nature to become a yoga teacher. It's not their innate nature. It's like, I can never become a mathematics teacher. For the life of me, I cannot. So for me to force myself to do something that is not within my nature is going to go against me. And so these are hard questions to ask. And most of the time, the answer that I get back is, ooh, okay, I need to pause on this and think a little more. So these are questions that I would put out to yoga teachers. And the most important one would be financially. You have to look, if you're financially secure and better now with your present job, quitting that, will that give you the same kind of financial support? Because if you don't have financial support, then you're not able to teach. You're not able to grow. You're not able to support your family, which is part of our purusharthas, our goal of life. So these are hard questions and no one asks them. You know, it's, you want to sign up, come and sign up, 200 hours, you're done. And now you're free to go. And that's when teachers are lost. And then you'll notice how they start to, maybe copy is a wrong word, but they tend to copy the teachers that they've learned from. So in other words, they've lost their voice because they're
like duplicating.
They're duplicating somebody else's.
And I think to some degree that emulation is natural, even if it, and often unconscious, because we're used to hearing a certain tone of voice or language. But you're right, there is a loss of self in that. And it becomes almost robotic, and it's certainly not natural. And I think our students can't feel the authenticity in that. So yes, we have to start somewhere, definitely. But certainly self-practice is going to cultivate that development of individuality, of course, but also exposing ourselves to different approaches of teaching and methodologies and language and so forth helps, certainly. But at the same time, I think, someone could pull me up on saying, well, that's conflicting because it is beneficial to stay with one teacher for an extended period of time. Certainly, and I get that, and I agree with that. But yes, if it means we're going to be like cookie cutter duplicates, instead of letting our own self kind of shine through, then students will never really connect with that. And ultimately, if it's not our dharma, it's not our dharma. We can't force these things. We cannot force them. And I always think back, so my professional background or career path prior to teaching yoga was as a professional dancer. And I was forced into retirement. I had been already practicing yoga for a number of years, and so many people said to me, well, are you going to start teaching dance? And I was like, no, like I've done this. Like I thought, no, I absolutely love dancing. It makes me cry. Like I found Odissi dance from Orissa, and I've been studying that for over a decade now. And it literally makes me cry. Like the act of dancing, it brings me so much joy and depth in my life. But I know I'm not destined to be a dance teacher, no matter how deeply I love the art form, So
I'll give you an example. Now, in my family, my grandmother always taught. Coming to my parents, both my parents were teachers, professor, teacher. Now, look, in my family, my brother is a teacher, my sister-in-law is a teacher. I wanted to stay away from teaching. My job, I started out as a beautician, a makeup artist, a spa manager, Montessori teacher, before I actually then became a yoga teacher. So it sort of ran in my family. And no matter how much I tried to push that away, teaching came back to me. It found me. And so that's what I mean by, if something is not in your nature, you cannot force it. Okay, fine, you can teach asana class, but when it comes to philosophy, I personally feel it's good to stay with one teacher because you get the maximum benefit. Agreed, you will get it from from that person's lineage or the lens through which they're looking at yoga. Once you've finished that and you've sort of incorporated into your life, you'll come to a point where you'll find, okay, I've understood this lens of the teaching. I'm now ready to try a different lens. So pulling in the information, the knowledge, and experiencing that knowledge is another thing I found is lacking within the yoga community. we don't give ourselves enough time to marinate in it. So that the three pillars of Vedanta, you hear, you ask the questions, and then you meditate on everything. Meditating meaning putting it into practice in your life. These 3 points are not there in yoga as a whole. Where we jump from one to the next, thinking the more knowledge I get or information I get, the better equipped I am as a teacher. And sometimes that falls flat.
Yes, it's that accumulation of knowledge and doing one course after another, after another, after another. And yeah, certainly I look back and I was absolutely guilty of that. I remember one year just spending, I think, $17,000 in 1 year on just doing courses. It was just absolutely nuts. And I would never do that again. And it just reminds me of, again, going back to the conversation of yoga in daily life and living yoga and being near the feet of your teacher. Even if in today's world that has to be online and being in regular satsang, or just that continuity and that consistency, going back to that anchoring, which reminds me of, the word guru itself, like that heavy earth element, anchoring us into reality and bringing us back home to the teachings, which we are so disconnected from. And also your words really make me think about how, particularly in the online sphere now, I think we're slowly shifting. It's always going to be there, but we're slowly shifting away with this obsession of just presenting yoga as asana online. There'll always be a pocket of that, but people are moving away. Maybe it's just the sort of bubble that I'm in, but I really feel like there are people out there now representing yoga in a different light. But then also yoga, there's yoga education now that's coming through, which is wonderful. But then there's also like a politicization of yoga and and commodifying that message as well, like making money off that message rather than actually educating and really just teaching yoga.
Yeah.
Like, let's just teach yoga. Like, let's just keep it at that, keep it really real, because that's so lacking anyway. We don't need to make things bigger than that, because there's already such an ocean that we can be diving into. So it's a really complex and complicated time. And I feel for so many students out there, these really sincere students that are just seeking guidance, like rational, grounded, stable, guidance and perspective.
So I have never, for me, and my stand on this, that for me, yoga is never political. And I say this because if you got the right teaching, then your ability to clear out the ignorance and to be critical with every information you take in, that comes in, discernment comes in. You are going to do what's right for your community. I don't need to politicize it and draw people in. My action is going to be to uplift my community. Now, somebody from my background and somebody from a different background will see things differently. It is that is their path. This is my path. This is my practice. I am not here to change your practice, because if I change your practice, then I am going to change my karma. I can only give you the information. I can give you the knowledge. I can give you the tools. The rest is up to you. So to me, I strongly believe in that. So when I see posts on yoga is political, then you have to ask yourself, from whose perspective is it? Whose lens are you looking at it? Who is it? We've crossed the line of information, knowledge, and personal opinion. We've blurred those lines.
I would add also, are you profiting from it?
Yeah.
That's really
There's
important.
always. Yeah. Yeah. And we see nowadays with what's happening in the world, there is chaos, and there's chaos in information. So we have to be very we have to feel, does this feel right? Does it sit with me? I can't like I said, I cannot force someone else to change. I can't force to change their mind. They have to put in the work. But many people don't want to put in the work. If somebody that they know or who has, especially on social media, who have many followers, because so-and-so has said it, that means it must be right. Not necessarily. And that's why history is important, going back, doing the work, checking, finding articles. I'm somebody, I'd like to first find as many articles I can find, and then I start asking people that I know who are aware of what's going on or who are knowledgeable about that subject. I get information from them. Then I ask them to direct me to people who have better information, who are more established in that, before I will post something. I really think nowadays, I did a post on that where we should have a little label that says, this is my opinion, this is bullshit, or this is political, so that people are aware from which opinion or which lens this post is coming from.
Yeah, and I think as someone who is not from the source culture, I think it's really important to obviously see, listen to, etc., the opinion of and the guidance, not just opinions, but opinions and guidance from people. This is similar to something I said earlier in the conversation, but from folks who have the cultural heritage that is associated with yoga, whether they were born in India or not, but even that in itself can be different and really important, whether you were actually raised in India or outside of India with the cultural heritage, maybe in your home but not in your outside life, versus really in the thick of it in India. Like, these produce very, very different and complex perspectives, and I think that we have to listen to all of them, not always the loudest one. And there's not like a hierarchy here, but I think it's really important for anyone listening in, like when we're not from the source culture, if you're listening to someone who is, it's important to also find people out there who are also from the source culture, but they may have a different opinion and weigh things up. And that's, I think, a really wholesome, safe, sensible, grounded approach to having the integrity to do the best we can to represent yoga and to embody yoga, to live yoga, and so forth. I hope that resonates.
We're a diverse culture within India in terms of the food we eat, in terms of our dressing, in terms of language. There is no one way. Even yoga has many paths, right? So you choose something that works for you. But that doesn't mean you shut off completely. You still have to be open. Part of that spiritual aspect, that spiritual growth, is listening. We don't listen anymore. We've taken somebody and this is it, and that's it. It's either a yes or a no. Life is full of gray. So what we hear is you have to be open to hearing, and you'll find when you're open to different perspectives, different opinions, personal opinions, information, yes, it gets confusing, but then your understanding becomes wider and broader. And what you do in that understanding then begins your work.
Yeah.
So South Asian teachers, when people say South Asian, I'm a little hesitant with that. I'd like to be known as an Indian yoga teacher. Somebody else would like to be known as a Pakistani yoga teacher, or it's just the way it is. Even how a Pakistani, a South Indian, or a Bengali, or maybe somebody from Nepal will teach yoga will be different. So there is no one way, and this is it. It's learning to take in as much information as you can. It's also learning to move and be in the gray area. In the West, we're very much, it should be this way or that way. So I think it's time that we learn to float in the gray and see what comes up.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of wisdom there. And I mean, we could speak for an hour on, or plenty more than that, on what you've just talked
I
about.
know.
Like, that would be a very mighty wormhole to go down into. But it is an important conversation to be having. And I think constantly inquiring and questioning what we're being told is really important in a very calm, diplomatic way, certainly.
Yes.
And I think that without going into a big tangent or into too much depth here, I think that even just what you said, those last, couple of minutes of your speaking really makes me think about what's going on in the world right now, and particularly what's going on in India and Bangladesh and that the South Asian region, I should say. And we have the Vedic and the Hindu culture, let's say, and I know that's very simplistic, but for ease and time, like, we have that to thank for birthing this yoga and these traditions that we know, and that's important to acknowledge.
But it's also important to acknowledge that, yes, yoga came from, now it is India, but before partition, it was India still. So it's by saying and changing where it comes from, or by saying, I've heard people say, respect the origin of yoga, but no one will say what the origin is. No one will say, it will say authenticity. Then say it.
Yeah.
We human beings make it complex. It's not complex. That's the difference. We make our lives complex, and we are complex human beings. That's just the way we are. So we need to learn to take away, step away, bring things down, make it simpler for us to understand and practice.
What would you say to any serious student who is yearning for more depth on the path? What guidance would you give them?
If they've found a teacher that they connect with on a spiritual level, when I mean spiritual, I mean they understand what you're going through, stay with that teacher. Try not to move into, first understand the knowledge that is being imparted by the teacher. And try not to get taken in by all the gimmicks of what yoga is or how I find all that is just noise. If you really want the understanding, find a teacher who will give you that spiritual teaching. Once you've established yourself in that takes time. Once you've established and you know that you're rooted in that teaching, then by all means explore the other things outside, because at least now you have your root, the main root that is going to support you. Like a tree, the tree has its trunk, it's rooted, but then every now and again you'll see it will sprout a little bit elsewhere, but that main tree is grounded, and that's what you need to be. So stay with one teacher, establish yourself, stay rooted before you want to explore other areas or other elements of the practice.
I love that metaphor.
So
it's very easy, but very clear and beautiful. It's great.
Yeah, but very difficult to do because human nature comes into play.
Everything's alluring.
Yes. Yes.
So for anybody tuning in who would like to connect with you further, we're going to send them to your website and your Instagram, which I will link up in the show notes. But your website is Savira Gupta, your name. Your Instagram is, well, it's your name, but it's a little play on your name. It's SAVVIRAG. And you also have a wealth of content as well for free on YouTube. So people can find you by your name. We'll link that up in the show notes as well. Is there anything that you would love to share in this moment in closing, or if there's anything you'd like to share that you've got coming up later this year, or any closing thoughts?
No, I don't do retreats, workshops anymore. I would say that whatever you're teaching, no matter how small or how big, stay with it. That will grow as your reservoir of knowledge will grow with you. Don't rush into it. enjoy the process, stay with the process, whether you're a student or whether you're a teacher.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Such lovely, wise closing words. Thank you so much for your grace and your integrity. And I really appreciate all that you share and how you communicate in such a grounded, calm, composed, rational, but generous and thought-provoking way. So thank you so much for everything that you do for our community. It's really appreciated.
No, thank you. Namaste. Thank you very much.
If this episode was of value to you and your life, please subscribe. And if you can think of someone who would benefit from this dialogue, please do them a favour and send it their way. If you feel called, hop on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review. This is the best way to get these conversations into the ears and hearts of our wider community, to those who need it most. You can find me at amyelandry.com or over on Instagram at amyelandry. May we all move a little closer to a life living in alignment.